Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting session of hashtag Gather to Grow with Food from Zanzi. It is an absolute pleasure to have my speakers join me tonight. My name is Dawn Numdu, and I'm your host for the session. So tonight we're going to be demystifying business and farming legalese, getting into some questions around trademarks with Lisa Van Zydem. She's a senior associate in trademarks at Adams and Adams. And then we also have Jade Hermanes, who's standing in for Katejo Ngwenya, an agricultural lawyer and who we know as the legal Burumese. So Jade is in for Katejo, as she is a junior consultant at Katika Consultancy. So really happy to have Jade here as well. And then I have my last guest, who is Shandini Naidu, who's the founder of Appleport. I'm going to just ask them briefly to tell us about them, two-liners, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks so much. Shandini, maybe you can kick us off. Thanks.
My name is Shandini Naidu. I'm a trade lawyer by profession, director of Appleport, which is an export management and trading company. And lastly, I'm a board member at the National Agricultural Marketing Council under the Minister Toko Didiza, where we develop policy and advise the Minister on frameworks for agricultural marketing within South Africa.
Thank you so much, Shandini. And that's actually a big part of what you'll be contributing tonight. I'm just giving a bit of market perspective, sharing some insights in terms of markets and research, and also, to be able to identify opportunities for niche products. So looking forward to picking your brain on that as the conversation goes. I'm going to give Lisa a chance to introduce herself. As I mentioned, she's a senior associate in trademarks at Adams and Adams. Lisa, you were able to join us again. You've been on this platform before.
So as you've mentioned, I am a senior associate at Adams and Adams Attorneys, and with our main office in Pretoria, but we've got branches, in a couple other towns across South Africa. With specializing in trademark litigation, it's specifically trademarks, copyright, company names, domain names, but then we also deal with advising in respect of advertising and regulations. And then obviously tonight we'll be focusing specifically on how trademarks can interplay in the agricultural space as well as some of the regulations.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and looking forward to having you here and just picking your brain as well. And then I have Jade Hermanes, who is a junior consultant at Katika Consultancy. She's standing in for Katejo Ngwenya, agricultural lawyer herself. Jade, thank you so much for being here. If you can just tell us a bit about you and more about your company.
My name is Jade Hermanes. I am a junior consultant at Katika Consultancy. I have an LLB degree. I'm a lawyer as well. So basically what we do is we specialize in water rights and water use license applications, and we help farmers to obtain these water use license applications. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yes, thanks, Jade. And quite a bit of contention when it comes to that topic at the moment. So we're hoping to kind of pick your brain on that too as part of the conversation. So I'm going to try and break it down. So maybe we can start with Lisa and the trademarks, and then move over to Jade and then Shandini as well. And then hopefully try and, just marry all of it. I definitely had to, I chose guests and speakers, and then they kind of advised on their expertise and how they can contribute to tonight's conversations. I hope you can get little bits of everything here this evening. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. Very simply ask you, what is a trademark and what is the relevance of trademarks within the farming sector? Thanks.
In South Africa, we have something called the Trademarks Act, and it specifically defines a trademark as a sign capable of being represented graphically, including a device, a name, a signature, a word, a letter, a numeral, a shape, a configuration, a pattern, an ornamentation, a color, or even a container for goods, or a combination of all of these. So what is the purpose of a trademark? Well, the purpose of a trademark, and I'll start citing some sort of well-known ones to you specifically in the agricultural sector that'll help you sort of drive this home. But the purpose of a trademark is to be able to identify the source of goods or services, but in this instance, obviously, good is the more relevant in terms of what's being produced. And why do you want to do that? Well, you want to do that so that people can then associate that particular good with you, and then they want to purchase that good. So let's take, for example, if I say ZZ2, if I say Karen Beef, if I AAA, that kind of thing, Regani, these are just ones that I know, from walking into the shop. Those are all obviously trademarks in the South African context, and that relate to products, specifically agricultural products that are being produced. By saying those marks, I hope, what products I'm referring to. So obviously ZZ2 being tomatoes, Regani being a brand of juices. I think it started as carrot juice, but there is a couple others that are also being produced. So that's really what is a trademark. And why is this relevant? Well, if you're going to produce goods, so not so much on the wholesale front, I'll get to how a trademark can still be, or rather a trade name can be relevant in a sort of wholesale part of things. But in terms of like an actual product, so let's say, for example, you are a potato producer or you're a tomato producer, and you are now wanting your product to land up in a store, you're going to need to probably brand that product in a way that people know where it comes from, simply by seeing that ZZ2 on the front of the packaging or on the side of the tomato box, that they know that that's where that product comes from. And by that, people then know, okay, well, they start to associate it with a particular quality, and then they go back to the store looking for that particular product purely on the basis of that trademarks, that name. Trade names, how does that come into play? Well, again, in your sector, what could be relevant here is the name under which you are trading. So again, this is a means of identifying what farm does this come from. In the wine is a big one where trade names and trademarks are very much relevant. When you stand in front of, from a consumer perspective, standing in the store looking at the shelf full of, let's say, all these different red wines, and I'm specifically now looking at a Pinotage, and then I see all these labels and I see all these names. How do I know which one's which? Well, I look at the brand name on it, so that trademark, and that's how I'm able to determine, okay, great, I want this Demystifying or whatever it is, or maybe it's a little, a startup wine farm, and I try it the once, and then I know, and I can tell everybody else about it based on that trademark. So it's a very valuable asset that can be used to basically market your goods.
Thanks so much for that explanation, Lisa. And what is the process, for example, when it comes to choosing company or trading name for a business? Do you always do it? When you said ZZ2, I immediately saw that packet of tomatoes with the yellow, branding on it. So it's very clear in my mind. Obviously, there's a lot of benefit to it. And then if you could also, I think you briefly explained, like when you use the name of a place or as a part of your trademark, for example, we could just answer those two together. Thanks.
Sure. What are some of the things to keep in mind? Well, try to find something so the ideal is to try to find something unique. And it can be as simple as 2 letters with a numeral like the ZZ2. So try not to use stuff that's already in the market. So, go do a little bit of market research. Make sure that what you are coming up with is a little bit unique. It's what we call coined. Of course, there are circumstances where your mark that you choose, your trademark, may be suggestive of the goods that you are producing. Something potatoes or something tomatoes, just knowing that there needs to be something in there that helps to make you stand out. That's on sort of the word part of it. It can be, a trademark can be coupled with logos or colors. Like you've mentioned, you're looking at that pack of the ZZ2, you've already got this color scheme in mind. So whatever you decide, just go and do a bit of research out there, see what others are doing, and try to do something different, preferably, so that you avoid, one, copying other people, because if you're going to copy other people, you're potentially going to get yourself into hot water and incur massive costs for branding and that kind of thing of your products. Let's say you're putting labels on stuff so that it can go into the supermarket, and now you're going to have to go and change everything because somebody else is going to come along and say, but I used that first. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then on the place side of it, so normally we don't suggest that you use the name of a place as your product, unless, of course, and why that is that, or at least it's prohibited in certain circumstances. And that's in circumstances where, for example, let's take the craft gin industry, which has become massive in South Africa. I saw there was also a thing you had recently about craft beer. But the craft gin industry, if you're going to call it a London gin, for example, but you're sitting here in South Africa, that's going to be a problem. So don't do that. Try not to use a place unless it's where the product actually comes from. Then, you can use a place as part of your name. Like, I say Robertson winery and you know exactly, or Robertson, you see it on the bottle of wine, you know exactly where it's coming from. That does, of course, open up a whole other spectrum of things. Obviously, for wines specifically, there are things like wines of origin, and then there's a whole certification process around that, and who can use what, where, and how, and that's just something to keep in mind. And then it also opens up, although maybe I think we will still come to that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lisa. I was actually hoping to maybe get Chandini into the conversation specifically around the market perspectives. And maybe she can just touch on, these factors or comment more so on what you're saying in terms of just the marketing angle of it, specifically because her contribution is around finding these niche products to market and identifying these opportunities. Chandini, just your comments on that, please.
I second what Lisa says, especially when it comes to identifying niche fresh produce or agro-processed goods. It's looking at what the market is, looking at the supply and demand, and doing what's different, and doing what the consumer wants. As I tell most of our farmers within our network, is when you go to the national market spaces and you see everyone's delivering butternuts and spinach, and there's a corner where there's niche products or niche fresh produce such as peppers, mushrooms, just off the top of my head, strawberries, berries, those kind of things. Those are the things you should be more pivoted to farming, harvesting, learning about, and remove yourself from the greater supply and identify those key things. And it's quite, if you're paying attention, it's quite easy, obviously, to see, but most of the time that's where farmers, especially the smallholder farmers who don't have economies of scale, face challenges with trying to sell their produce. That is at mass supply at the national market spaces. So the same principles as Lisa elaborated to earlier when it comes to trademarks is the same sort of mindset and thought process you should have when identifying as a smallholder farmer or an emerging farmer the gaps in the market, what is needed in the market. And the quickest and easiest way to do that is to approach your local store. Ask the manager what is his biggest selling items.
I want to say so.
So the quickest, easiest hack for small-scale farmers, emerging farmers, is to actually go to their local big chain stores, your Pick and Pays, your Food Lovers, and so on, and ask the manager what is his quickest sale item in his fresh produce line. And most of the time he would be able to tell you what they are, and as well as seasonally. So with farming, it's all about seasons and what to plant and when to plant it. So having those kind of insights is actually how I started. I think I told you this, Dawn, during our podcast, is I pretended to be a farmer initially, and that sort of drove me into what I'm doing now. And those are the type of simple steps and hacks that you could do, looking at the National Fresh Market website and seeing what their rates are daily for the different produce lines, and sort of planning according to that. One of the biggest challenges we see with our farmers is they have 2 to 10 hectares of land and they're planting 5 to 6 different lines of produce, which really doesn't give them a big yield. And when they go to the national market space or even to the retail stores, they have to sell it at their cost and not the cost of what the retailers or consumers or buyers are looking at. And that's where the disparity lies. So we always say to our farmers, concentrate on 1 or 2 lines where you can have big yields that is in the niche space. So it's not your normal cash crop. And that way you are most likely guaranteed a decent profit. And also it helps you plan better. It gives you more capital to do more, to learn more. And at this day and age, there's a lot of information available if you're just willing to look.
Thanks, Shandini. A lot of great perspective. I think there's so much to kind of elaborate on as the conversation goes. And maybe I want to just say thanks to Katlego, who's also in the space, although she's listening on the sidelines, giving room for Jade to take stage here or tonight. But I want to just go back to Lisa, and then I would like to do the water rights thing separately. I was just bringing Shandini in just to connect to what Lisa was saying around, trademarks. I'm going to go back to Lisa and maybe explain more about the concept and also connect it to the geographical indicators. If you can maybe just touch on that, Lisa, thanks.
So maybe let's just start with, what is a geographical indicator? So that's an indicator that identifies that a particular product originates from a particular region or locality, where there's like a specific quality, reputation, or other characteristic of the product that's essential to it having that geographic origin. So when I say to you, obviously these are international ones, but I say to you champagne. Where does that come from? The Champagne region in France. Parma ham, Geelong tea, Parmesan cheese, Kalamata olives. And then, of course, we have some local ones as well. Honeybush tea, that specifically from your Eastern Cape and Western Cape regions. Rooibos tea. Not everyone can just call their product Rooibos, only if it comes from the Cederberg area. Karoo lamb, for example. You can't go call your lamb Karoo lamb if you're farming in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, because we've got a specific association that lamb, has specific characteristics and qualities. So that is what a geographical indicator is, and they are specifically protected in South Africa. So South Africa has, through it being a member of the World Trade Organization and something called the TRIPS Agreement, has an obligation to ensure that we look after and protect certain of the geographical indicators that are foreign geographical indicators, like I mentioned, the champagne and Parma ham. But then equally, there's an obligation internationally, and this is where like Honeybush and Rooibos and Karoo come into play. And actually, in fact, a bunch of wines as well. If I'm not mistaken, Paul is one of them that's also protected, where you can't, be in another country, for example, be sitting in Portugal and call your wine a Paul wine, because it's not. It does not come from Paul. It's coming from Portugal. So that's what a geographical indicator does. And not only are they protected, but it's also something just to keep in mind that maybe that's another way that if your product has a specific characteristic or quality, that you play to that strong point in the marketing of your product. So, for example, if it is actually, lamb that is being raised in the Karoo region, then, by all means, within some other aspects I'm going to speak to now, a little bit later about collective marks and certification marks, but, by all means, if that's true, then call it Karoo lamb. At least from a consumer perspective, is a good marketing point. So, if you've got those, try and play to them and utilize them. But then equally, don't call something if it's not that, because you're going to get into trouble on any packaging that you produce. Of course, it's not so thing on sort of your fresh produce, unless, of course, you're saying it comes from Cape Town when actually it comes from Kimberley, because that's straight up misleading as to the qualities and what one's expecting from it. And that can get you into hot water, where you could have the product pulled from the shelves, the various inspectors from the departments, or, you could get into hot water with the retailer, where they're like, oh, gee, this is not true. No, I don't want to stock your product anymore. And, when you're trying to sort of break into the market, and interesting hearing Shandini speak about the challenges that are being faced, that you're obviously wanting to try and get in there with one or two products, be strong in them, but then also show that quality and try and utilize these little things to push yourself forward, shall I say.
No, definitely. And then just to touch on what you spoke about, you use the word or refer to collective marks. What is that exactly? And when can it be used?
So a collective trademark is a mark can also still distinguish in the course of trade goods or services of persons who are members of that association. So it's only if members of the association are able to distinguish their goods from somebody else's who are not members. So things like geographical names and other indicators of geographical origin may be registered as collective trademarks, so like Rooibos and Karoo. And a good example of this is exactly that. There is a certified Karoo meat of origin which is being filed as a collective trademark, the Kalahari Red Club, and I learned about this, I didn't know it. Kalahari Red is a type of goat which is specifically bred for its meat to eat, and that is a collective trademark. So if you want to use that, you obviously need to then contact the organization. So you need to contact Kalahari Red Club and say, listen, can I please use your mark? You obviously need to abide by whatever rules they've set up for you to use that mark. And then you may, once you've got the approval, then you can put Kalahari Red as part of your marketing. Just say, look, this is what makes my product different to, somebody else's product out there that's goat's meat that's being produced. Compared to a certification trademark, that is something which it doesn't only serve the function of distinguishing. What that's doing is telling us about the characteristic of the particular goods and that they've been up to a certain standard or they've been certified by somebody as meeting a certain standard, quality, quantity, or purpose. So those could be things like, so again, the Karoo. So it could be certified. The Karoo Foundation Trust has a certified Karoo meat of origin trademark. And then another very big one is the proudly South African. If you're producing wool or if you are, whether you're making a jam that, you're wanting to sell or whatever it is, you can't just go and pluck on the proudly South African trademark, for example, because it is a certification trademark. So you need to have gone to that body and gone and asked for permission, again, adhering to the various rules and conforming and saying, yes, my product meets X, Y, and Z. And then they'll say, yes, you can use it. And then you can put that on. And again, that then becomes another marketing point for you, particularly, not so much, I think, if you're starting out, but if you're a little bit more established, if you're looking at potentially exporting or even in South Africa, I suppose. Many of us do want to try and support products that are produced here, and if it says proudly South African on it, it's a nice way to, oh yeah, cool, I'll rather buy that than the imported product that's coming in, and let's support local.
Just as we sort of wrap up this part of the conversation, Lisa, so how does one obtain, protection for a trade name or a trademark? And also the proudly South African thing as well, does it all work in the same way across the board, across commodities? Just kind of want to understand that as well.
So the first thing is that trademarks are divided up according to the specific goods or the specific services that you're trying to seek protection for. So you're not going to be able to just get a trademark and then it applies to every type of good or service out there. So what I mean by that is, let's take Kalahari Red. So there's a specific class. It's divided up according to an international system where you would be applying for that trademark in respect of, let's say, livestock, so for goats itself, for selling them, as well as for the actual meat. So that would be class 31 for livestock, but then it'll be class 29 for meat, particularly goat's meat. It is limited, so you need to just figure out first what the exact product is that you want to use your trademark on. How do you register? Well, you register with CIPC, so the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission. And there's obviously a form that one can fill in. You can do it yourself or you can approach an attorney like myself. You fill in the form, provide all the information about your name, what class of goods or services you're going to be using it on, as well as if it's now a collective mark. So let's say you've set up like a membership organization saying that, everyone that's part of this can use it. Then there's a certain rules and stuff that you need to put up when you apply for the mark. In the case of a certification trademark, because obviously there we're saying that it meets, either a specific quantity, purpose, quality, whatever, there you also have to file the specific rules that are required in order to ensure that something can actually meet that standard. So let's say, for example, I don't know, you have to have produced raised the lamb within X square meters of Sutherland or whatever the case is, to qualify to be in the Karoo. That would also have to be filed with it. And then it does take a bit of time to get registration. Unfortunately, it's a little bit long in South Africa at the moment, and something like 12 to 18 months. But all is not lost, because even if you just, and now I'm not talking collective and certification trademarks, I'm just talking a general trademark like the ZZ2 that we spoke about, or Karen beef. The moment that you start using it, you start developing a reputation in it. So even if you haven't yet registered something, you're already acquiring a reputation, and that will enable you to potentially stop somebody else from using the same thing at a later stage. So it's always advisable to register, but if you haven't yet, that's okay. It's not like you don't have any rights at all to something. You can get rights just because you've been using it and building up this name in that trademark.
I want to give, some of my other guests also a chance to focus on the areas that they are contributing on as part of tonight's conversation. And I'm now On that note, going to move over to Jade. Jade is here to tell us or talk the issues around water rights and the recent published draft that was proposed. And I think comments on that has closed. And so the proposed bill is now talking about certain enterprises that would need up to 75% of Black shareholding to apply for water licenses. So I want to just focus firstly on this new proposed regulations and how this will change the game for farmers across the board in Mzansi's agri-sector. And then we'll talk more broadly around, organized agricultural bodies being very opposed to it, and then some of other organizations saying, yes, definitely, we back it 100%. Jade, you now finally have a chance to speak, and we also have Katejo here also to contribute on this topic. But first, over to you, Jade. Thanks.
Hello, I am a junior consultant with Katika Consultancy, and we specialize in water rights and water use license applications. So first of all, to come back to what is a water use license, because that is what the draft regulations are talking about. In a nutshell, you need a water use license to use water on your property, say farm, whatever, but you only need a water use license if you exceed, say, a given amount of water. So you won't need it if you are using water for domestic use, or it's under general authorization, or it's an existing lawful water use. According to the draft regulations, to get into that, it states that enterprises applying for water use licenses to take or to store water will in future have to allocate shares of up to 75% to Black South Africans. So it goes from 25% to 50 to 75%. And this depends on how much water you are going to be extracting or storing. So it won't automatically jump to 75% of your company. It will depend on the volume of water you are going to be extracting. The issues that these proposed regulations might hold in for the future will be obviously that, as we established, that agriculture is a very, very important part of our lives, because we are going to get our food from. And just to get back on that as well, about the topic of the trademarking of a product, just to say that if we don't have any goats per se to sell or to do it on the farm, we won't be needing a trademark. We don't be needing to trademark a product at all. So all of these other things essentially won't matter if we don't have water on our lands. And I think that is what the farmers are afraid of, are like, oh, so we're going to be needing this percentage of Black ownership in our farm so that we can have this amount of water. And success in farming starts with not just the land, but the access to water. So having access to water is a very big part as well for agriculture. And therefore, this is a very touchy subject for most people, because we know that most of the farms are historically advantaged individuals, right? And we believe that this bill, if it comes to pass, will not be applied retrospectively, because it would cause chaos, just to say. Imagine all the farm owners now having to say that, oh, we need a Black shareholder, we need 2 Black shareholders because we need this amount of water, and we need this and this and that, and then it would be chaos at the end of the day. Personally, there would be a lot of animosity amongst people, because imagine having 50% of your company is going to a Black person, and then you have no say just because you want water, and water is necessary for your farm to thrive or to work or just even be. I think that would be one of the biggest problems or the issues that people will have with these new proposed regulations.
Thanks for that, Jade. Thanks for that perspective, and also just for sharing your insights on it. Lisa, you were more than welcome to come in.
I have a question for Jade. I find this very interesting, what you're speaking about. I wondered about how this potentially would impact specifically bottled water producers. I mean, that seems to be a bit of a sort of a thing market at the moment in South Africa. How would that impact on those producers?
I think this is where I'll jump in. Sorry, Jade, I'm jumping to answer Lisa. So bottled water is the same thing. So let's all remember that the National Water Act of 36 of 1998 specifically says that the water resources have been nationalized, same thing as if you have gold on your farm or on your land, you have to get a permit in order to mine it and expropriate it from the land. So given that, it means also with bottling companies and people that want to use water to make sparkling water or still water, they also have to apply for a water use license to do that project. And in our Water Act currently, it does have a license for that. There's 11 uses in our act. And it's not just about agriculture, it affects mining, it affects people that are doing bottled water and all of that. So there's not much of a difference. We just happen to be talking about agriculture at the moment, but the act covers every industry that has anything to do with water. Right? So even ESCOM is included in it, that if you're using water, you have to have a license for what you're doing in terms of the water use. So I think it's very important for people to remember that just because in this conversation we're talking about agriculture, the National Water Act does not talk about agriculture. It talks generally about the use of water because the government is the custodian of all the water resources in this country. It just happens that in this particular case, we are specifying agriculture.
Thanks, Lisa. Were you happy with that response?
Yes, thanks. No, that's great. I just wondered how it played into the picture. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. On the focus on of the agriculture, they both Food from Zanzi and other agricultural publications wrote quite a bit on it. And in the one article that I read, organized agricultural bodies like Agri-SA and more specifically, Jan Sarabi, who is the legal and policy executive at Agri-SA, was very much opposed to this, as well as Theo de Jager, who's the executive director of the Southern African Agri Institute. I don't know why I'm quoting two men and this is supposed to be a woman-led discussion. Apologies for that. I'm just realizing it now as I was reading it. To get your comments on that, what would you propose is the best way forward? Katlego, Jade, you've been working on this obviously very closely. And also, where are we at in terms of it? And where do you see us going towards our future, just, in terms of agriculture, but also just water in general? Thanks, Katlego.
I think Jade answered it very correctly, that of course it's an emotional issue, it's very upsetting. Anybody that has a farm at the moment and there's this amendment coming up saying that you have to give 75% or 50 or 25 or whatever the case might be in terms of disruption, and that will be the deciding factor of whether you'll get a license or not, right? And therefore what are the conditions that goes with it, is emotional, is upsetting. Nobody wants to have to be legislated to give away parts of your business if you want water in order for your business to succeed. So of course it's an emotional issue, but I think everybody again misses the point that this amendment or proposed amendment where the comments are closed is not a new thing. There was a white paper that was introduced 10 years ago, right? So I'm sorry to say that AFRI Forum and the guys that have gone against it and have had a lot to say when the amendment came out are late, because there was a white paper that came out 10 years ago, so we knew this was always coming, right? Because if the white paper came out 10 years ago, it means that we already had a bit of an idea of where the government is going with the act. And we always call it a new act, but it's not, right? It came into effect in 98. They gave people 5 years before that, 2 years before that, to say something about it and to solidify their rights in terms of existing lawful uses, and they didn't. So it's not a new act. From 98, it's been around, right? It's just that now everybody is aware of it because we do have droughts in our country. We are a water scarce country. So everybody's being surprised, but we knew the amendment is going to come because the white paper came out 10, 15 years ago. I can share it with everybody later via email, and also with Food from Zanzi. The white paper says the same thing, which is exactly the amendment that they're proposing. So in our opinion, as Katika and as Jade mentioned, that it will come through. Comments are closed. It's just a formality. So of course we have to ask for comments. Government will always ask for comments, but they don't propose something and write a whole amendment, of the act without having thought about it before, and have had it on the books for a long time. All right. So it's not, it's not a shocker. So AfriForum, Agri-SA being up in arms, I get it. I get the thought behind it, because it's a shocker for our clients and the farms and the farmers, but it's been in the cards. All right. So what they should have done is that when the white paper came out, already had opposed that white paper to say that's ridiculous and that's unfair. But as it happens in life, when it happens 20 years ago, you don't think about it because you're like, oh no, 20 years, we'll get to it. Right? But you don't realize that if you don't deal with it now, when it happens, it's a problem and it's too late. There's nothing that can be done. So in our opinion is Katika, and as Jade said earlier, I believe it's going to happen. It's going to become law. And I don't think they'll stop it because constitutionally I can't figure out a reason why, because the arguments are solid of why they want to do it that way, because the agricultural sector does have to transform and change. And if people won't change or farmers won't change naturally, systematically within their business practices, then countries, not just South Africa, countries, governments in other places then formalize it in legislation to force it to happen because you're not participating as a business person. And this is not original to the agricultural sector. It's happened in other sectors as well. So it's not a shocker. So I would warn people and caution people to be not so sensitive because we're talking about agriculture. It's happened everywhere else in other sectors in this country. And then it's also happened in other countries where government gets to a point of saying that, okay, as a business, you guys are not participating, so we will legislate it and put it in law and force you, whether you like it or not.
Thanks, Katlego. Mzwandile, you would like to contribute? You have the floor. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I'm actually surprised at how much this intended bill is misrepresented. So I just want to give a quick context and background. At the moment, of South Africa's total water, 60% of it is allocated towards agriculture. And if I'm correct, I think close to 90% of that allocation is white-owned. Now, what the new bill is seeking to do is then to say any new allocation that is remaining, that means water that has not been allocated, that then will give preference to previously disadvantaged individuals or blacks, if the term suits you. It has no effect or intended effect on current water users or water license holders or what you call water rights. The intended bill is to give water affairs the legal backing, for a lack of a better word, to the buyers in whom it allocates water to. Now, if in a country such as ours, where you had legislation that deliberately deprived majority of the population of South Africa in terms of resource allocation, and under the democratic government, that government is saying whatever is remaining, as minute as it might be, let us therefore have preferential allocation. That is, out of the 100%, 90% is already allocated to a minority grouping. The 10% that might be available, let that be allocated to black individuals. I still do not understand what the issue is and the cry is when that is intended legislation that is being proposed. So I'm just bringing context that the new bill proposed has got nothing to do with taking water from people that already has water license. It has got to do with any future allocation in trying to balance the scale. The opposite of that would be expropriation of current water licenses. Then to say, okay, if 90% of the water is owned by a minority group, let's take half of it or a particular percentage and reallocate it. That's not what this bill is saying. It is saying whatever is remaining that is unallocated, that you are intending to allocate is a grouping that has previously been disenfranchised.
Thank you so much for that context, Mzwandile.
Sorry to cut you out. Mzwandile just explained it 100% properly. That's exactly what this amendment is saying. It's not saying they're going to take water from current licensed people. What's important, though, is to remember that a lot of people in this country are not licensed. But everybody that is licensed with a proper water use license that's legal will never lose their water. So the amendment will not affect them. It's nothing to them. So currently, before this amendment comes into law, I'm saying to all my clients, come, let's fix our stuff. Let's be licensed properly. Because then this amendment means nothing to you. So there's no need to be upset because it will not affect you because our laws don't act retrospectively. So it's not a personal thing. It's not a, the government's being ugly to white people story. And I feel like, I'm sorry, AgriForum, AgriSA have scared everybody. But no, that's not what they're saying. They're saying that going forward, though, new water rights, if you have not redressed the past and you're asking for new water rights, then these are the conditions. But everybody that's legal right now as we speak tonight and has a full license for 40 years will not lose their water because now there's an amendment to this Water Act. And that's what's important for people to know. Then the point of departure is that, first of all, be licensed. Stop using water illegally because we have this act. It's not a new act. It's been around since 1998. So license your water and just abide by the law. And then if there is an amendment to it that now adds more conditions to how you can get a water use license, then that's the bag you have to carry. It's not a sensitive thing. It's not a racial thing. It's not anything. And Mzandile is 100% correct.
Just on that point, Katlego, so you mentioned 40 years, so that's how long you get your hold of this license, so you have access to this water, and then it has to be renewed. And if it's renewed, it would have to be renewed on this new regulation. So
not necessarily, because if you have a 40-year license, just before it expires, right? So if you get a license now, it says 40 years. 40 years from now, 2 years before the 40 years expires, we just renew it because we still need the water. And so it's not a brand new license you have to do at expiry. You can renew it. So you go back to the department and say, I need another 40 years. So thank you for the license. I've had it for 38 years. I'm coming back to you for a renewal of the license. So I think it's very important to remember that, like, there's good intricacies and there is levels to the act and how you deal with the Department of Water and Sanitation. And they're not as unreasonable as the arguments that sometimes your forum does and all these parties that are fighting it. It's not like that. Putting it out in the news as some scare story is unfair. And Zwandile is correct. That's not what they said. And that's why I'm convinced that the amendment will go through, because their argument is strong and it's correct. They've done nothing wrong, the government, with what they're suggesting. Is what is left of the water resources in the country. And if you are a fully licensed white owner that has your license in place for your water, no one's touching it. How can we? We have a constitution, guys, that protects you. And it protects every single person, not based on race, but based on your constitutional rights as a South African.
Mzandile, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, Don.
You can go.
Yeah, that's fine. Listen, I'll be quick this time around. Let's just go back, because Katlego was saying something about 1998 and beyond. You see, any water user, okay, let me put it this way. Anyone who owned water lawfully before 1998, that water was known as a water right. Then with the new legislation after 1998, anyone who applied for water, you got a water license. The difference between the two, and sometimes we argue this in economic spaces when we're having these debates with water affairs. But to go back, anyone who owned water lawfully before 1998, that water is not touched. It's not a water license. I know that you have got fancy terms now, but the normal term that
it's called an existing law for use.
Exactly. Thank you for that correction. That means anyone who owned the water right then, which is now called an existing water use, that is classified slightly differently. However, any license that was issued after 1998 then becomes a water license in common terms. It is that then any water license issued after 1998, those are the ones that gets renewed on a 20 to 40 year basis, and not the ones before 1998. Now, if you were to go to majority of your white commercial farmers, most of their water lawfully allocated before 1998 are not subject to renewal, as far as I know. Katlego, you know this better than me, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. But anything issued after 1998 is subject to renewal. And there is where majority of the black people are featuring, because majority of black licenses of black irrigators only came into the system after 1998, and they come into the system under the water license. And those licenses are what gets renewed every 20 to 40 years. And then just lastly, the issue of renewal is not impacted by the current bill, because on that license renewal, on a yearly basis, audits are done by Water Affairs to assess if there were any suspect conditions that accompanies the license, if you do fulfill them. So the only reason why a license is not renewed after 20 or 40 years is if you are not complying to the license conditions issued by Water Affairs. And then that just lastly, majority of the people who got their water after 1998 didn't pay for it, but majority of the people who got their water before 1998 under water right generally would have bought that water from someone. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Zandile. I want to thank all of my guests for being here, Jade, Katlego, Lisa. And then I'm just going to ask you guys to share one last comment, maybe just focusing a bit on what you spoke about. I'm going to start with Lisa in terms of trademarks. Thank Lisa.
Do your homework, come up with a good idea after doing your homework, and then capitalize on that. So find a trademark that works for you, and then really capitalize it and get it out there, get it in people's faces so that people can associate it obviously with a good quality or high quality product. And hopefully then you can have consumers actually specifically asking for your particular, strawberries or wherever it is in the shop.
Thank you so much. Jade, just your last comments. Conversation was very engaging, and I'm so happy that you were able to kick us off with that. Thanks, Jade.
So my last comments would be that don't stress, as you heard from Zandile and Katlego as well. This regulations will only be of effect for new water use licenses and emerging farmers. So please don't stress, and I hope that we have more young Black farmers in the future. Thank you.
Definitely, I echo that. Katlego?
Nope, I was just a listener tonight, so Jade said it all for us. So I have no comments. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Katlego. And I just like to thank Lisa and Jade and Katlego as listener/contributor tonight. Zandile, you've really given us flames as well. So thank you for joining and contributing and sharing your experience on this topic tonight. I hope that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. But have a good rest of the evening, everybody. I'll be back next time. Maybe not on the exact same space, but please be on the lookout for where I'll be hanging out with you guys, and have a great rest of the evening. Happy farming. Enjoy the agricultural sector as much as I do. And just have a good evening further. Bye, everybody.